class. We're so glad to have you. And I am very glad, even though the in-person people are scattered across the room tonight. We had to do a different setup tonight. But I'm glad that you are joining us from home, wherever you are. And it's kind of hard to believe here we are in December already. But we are glad that you're taking time out of your busy schedule to study this important topic. And this is a very important topic because I believe that we are indeed living in the end times. And there are some precious promises that have been given in God's Word regarding this time. And if you are like me, you want to know, are we on the verge of seeing so many of these promises fulfilled that have been in the Word of God? I believe we are. So it matters. It matters, and this is, I feel, an exciting topic, particularly when we get into finding out about where did all of these people go, where are they now, and could we find out something about ourselves as we continue this study, and I think that's true too. We have started now on the history of the Yehudahites. And so often, and it's true, and I know you've heard this before, that people have a tendency to amalgamate under this one term, Jew, all of Israel, and that's technically not true. And I've asked you this before, I'm going to ask you this again. Was Abraham a Jew? No, he was not. And actually, the first time we see the term Jew used in the Bible is in the book of Esther. If you know anything about the book of Esther, you have gone through the Babylonian captivity, and now you're in the Medo-Persian captivity when you hear that term. Abraham was not called a Jew. There was a place where he was called a Hebrew. So understand that technically this term, Yehudahite, was used obviously of the members of the tribe of Judah. It also was used as a collective term for those members of the southern tribe, the southern kingdom of Judah that consisted of the tribes, primarily Judah, part of Levi, and Benjamin, and at times Simeon. And when we begin to, I'm doing a study right now on the tribe of Simeon, my own, trying to boil it down to a size that I can give it to you. And it becomes very fascinating about the tribe of Simeon, because as you know, Simeon was in Judah, right next to Judah and land allotment, and what they do and where they go is highly interesting. But you will see that this term was used for first those descendants of the tribe of Judah, and then the kingdom of Judah. So we are looking at primarily right now the history of the kingdom, the southern kingdom of Judah. So we are at the time now, we are on the first page. If you're just joining us, if you'll look down, you'll see that you can print out the Romans 35 notes. And the reason why this is Romans, if you're just joining us, is because we went off on this study in preparation for going into the 11th chapter of Romans, so we could understand the 10th and 11th chapters of the book of Romans. So that's why it's called Romans Notes. But we are on page 1, note 5, and we're going to talk about what happened to the kingdom of Judah during the Crusader rule. And the Crusader rule covers the years 1099 to 1291 AD. And so from 1099 to 1291 AD, the Crusaders mercilessly persecuted and slaughtered the Jews of what was then called Palestine. And what often happened was, we know, and by the way, most of the Crusaders, not all, many of them, most of them were French. And that will become very important when we look at the tribe of Reuben, but I will just kind of throw that out to you. And they would come in, and their whole motive was to free the Holy Land, or the Levant, from Muslim control. And the problem was that because of culture and dress, they couldn't tell the difference, number one. And number two, you still had a great deal of hatred toward the natural people of God, the Jews, and Israel. But they hated the Jews, so a great deal of that went on. Under Crusader rule, the Jews were not allowed to own land. They were not allowed to own land and involve themselves in commerce in the coastal towns whenever they were allowed to do so. So that's what they would do. One thing you will find, and many people say, well, and I've heard this, and if I hear this one more time, I probably will snatch myself bald. But the Jews have all the money, and they just, and, you know, I have friends, and sometimes what we say is, I wish that were so. But here's one of the reasons why that lie was even allowed to continue. Most people in that day had their wealth tied up in what? Land, property. And if you were not allowed to have land, well, obviously you're not using your money to buy land that you're not allowed to buy. And so you would have that capital. And also, when you understand these different periods of time when Jewish people were indeed violently persecuted, you kept your capital in something that is fluid, because you don't know when you're going to have to flee. So there were Jewish communities that were scattered all over the country, including Tiberias. And some of you, I know, have been to Tiberias. Some of you probably were in Tiberias and didn't know you were in Tiberias. Well, where are we? So whenever you were on the Sea of Galilee, you were in Tiberias. And I know all of you that went tramping through the diamond factory, that's Tiberias. So they were in Tiberias, they were in Ramla, Ashkelon, and I know you were also all here. Those of you who've ever gone to Israel, you have been here, and that's Caesarea. And Caesarea, let me spell this. With Tiberias is Tiberius. And Caesarea is Caesarea. And there's more than one Caesarea. This Caesarea is the Caesarea on the Mediterranean Sea. Now, often, Muslims and Jews were indiscriminately sold into slavery. And this was during the Crusader period. And most of the Jewish residents of Jerusalem were killed or sold into slavery. And what would happen, they would have big redemption fees that they would put on the Jewish slaves. And so some of these slaves were later redeemed by Jewish communities in Italy and also Egypt, because there were heavy contingencies of Jewish people who fled to Egypt, which kind of followed a pattern that happened in 586 BC when Jerusalem was destroyed by Nebuchadnezzar. Because we know that Jeremiah got out Zedekiah's daughters, and they fled where?
Egypt.
To Egypt, where they were adopted by the Pharaoh. Okay. So there were Jewish communities in Egypt and Italy, and then they would pay money to redeem from slavery their Jewish brethren. While Jewish communities of Ramla and Jaffa, you know where Jaffa is. If you've been to Tel Aviv, you've been next door to Jaffa. They were dispersed. In other words, they were shoved out and they went every direction. The communities in the Galilee, believe it or not, were left pretty much unscathed. They were up north, and they were, for the most part, were not touched. And that was during the Crusader period. Now we want to look at the decline and revival with increased immigration that occurred in 1211 to 1517. Now the Crusader rule over the area called Palestine, and I have to admit, it's very difficult for me to use that term. Because I'm just going to tell you, there was never ever a Palestine. Ever. There was never a country, Palestine. There was never a people called Palestinians. This was the name that was given to the Holy Land by the enemies of Israel. And they named it that after the Philistines, so that it would always be an in-your-face insult to Israel and the Jewish people. But this is what it was called. So if someone says to you, walks up to you, say, I'm a Palestinian, just look at him and know there is no such a person. Okay, I'm not going to go, I almost did, but I didn't. And I didn't mean it like that, I meant it as a term, but you don't even use those terms. So there is no such person, nationality, as a Palestinian, because there was never, ever a legitimate nation called Palestine. So it took a heavy toll on the Jews. The Crusader period was terrible. Relief came, believe it or not, relief came in 1187 AD when Saladin defeated the Crusaders at the Battle of Hattin. And when you were in the area of the Galilee,
Can you spell that out?
oh yes, Hattin, Hattin. It's pronounced Hattin. When you were on your way down to Tiberias, unfortunately, sometimes you have a guide who never points out the most important things. You passed what were called the Horns of Hattin, and that's where that battle took place. And that really was a very important battle, because he also took Jerusalem and most of the area that was called Palestine, most of the Holy Land. A Crusader state centered around Acre in a weakened form, it centered around Acre in a weakened form for another 100 years. Okay? But Saladin issued a proclamation inviting all Jews to return and settle in Jerusalem. So Judah al-Hartzi compared Saladin's decree allowing Jews to reestablish themselves in Jerusalem to the one issued by the Persian Cyrus, remember King Cyrus the Great, over 1,600 years earlier. Because they've been dispersed, they've been scattered, and now he said, or killed, definitely persecuted, and now he has said Jews can come back and settle in Jerusalem. In 1217, Al-Harzi visited Jerusalem and writes that he found a prosperous Jewish community living in the city. In 1260, control of the land fell to the Egyptian Mamluks. And so the land then began to see waves of Mongol invaders. You got all the, now why am I pointing these things out? Because one thing you're going to find about that little swath of land, it has been invaded numerous times. And every time somebody else invades it, then you have dispersions, you have all sorts of things going on. So Mamluk rule lasted until 1517, when guess what? You had another invasion by the Ottoman Empire, and they conquered this land. So then, any questions about the Crusaders or the increased immigration back to Jerusalem? Okay. Now, the Ottoman rule was 1517 to 1917, and we're talking about what you would know today as modern-day Turkey. So Palestine was conquered by the Turkish Sultan Selim II in 1516 and 1517. And when he conquered it, he made it a part of the province of Syria, because what happened is you had Turkey expanding, the Ottoman Empire expanding. So when they basically came down from Syria into this area, they just made it a part of the province of Syria, by the way, for the next 400 years. From 1517 to 1917, that land was a part of the province of Syria controlled by the Turks, the Ottoman Empire. And at the beginning of the Ottoman rule in 1517, there were an estimated 5,000 Jews, comprising about 1,000 Jewish families in that whole land. And Jews mainly lived in Jerusalem. Obviously, that would have been the key place where they would have lived. They also lived in Nablus. And they would have lived in Hebron. And let me ask you this question to see if anyone knows the answer. Why do you think there was a large, at least a good-sized group of Jewish people living in Hebron? Because that's where the patriarchs are buried. That's where the tomb of Abraham. Okay. Gaza, along the coast. Safed, S-A-F-E-D. And by the way, we were, when we were in the northern part of the Galilee, we were very close to Safed. It is, to this day, a holy Jewish city. And villages in the Galilee. So the Galilee was a very popular place for many of the Jews to live in 1517. Now the 17th century, the 1800s, saw a steep decline in the Jewish population in the Holy Land due to the unstable security, S-E-C-U-R-I-T-Y, security situation. Natural catastrophes and abandonment of urban areas. So there really wasn't a secure, safe place they felt to live, and so you began to see a decline in the population. And so that area called Palestine, that you and I know is Israel and some surrounding countries, turned into a remote and desolate part of the Ottoman Empire. So it wasn't, it was just remote. It was like what most people would consider a wilderness area. In the 1880s, Ashkenazi Jews from Europe. Okay, so.
Sister Sherry.
Yes.
The 1211 to 1517, is that AD or BC?
No, where
Is
is
it
that?
AD then? It's
I'm
right here, decline and revival with increased immigration. You got
1211 to 1517 AD.
Okay, that's what I
AD.
thought. I just
Yes, it
wanted to
is.
double
It
check.
is AD. The question
Yeah.
was this AD in this Ottoman period? Yes, it was.
Okay.
So, and I'm not going to get into, because I know people have different views about Ashkenazi. Ashkenazi, and it's like everything else, and I shared with you last week, if we decided to call the thing you're sitting on a table, and everybody agreed to call it a table, everybody would know what we were talking about, right? Well, the term Ashkenazi has to do with an ancient location of Ashkenaz, which was located in Europe. Now, you can go through the Table of Nations, and I understand that, and I accept that wholeheartedly and completely, but for the study that we're doing, and for the study that your probably DNA has done, Ashkenazi was used to speak of European Jews. Okay? So Ashkenazi Jews from Europe, as well as Sephardic Jews, and please hear me, many Sephardic Jews traveled from North Africa. So I'm going to do this, North Africa to Iberia. So that's kind of a sidebar there, because I know what's going to happen. The minute I give you these countries, you're going to say, Bo, what about Spain and Portugal? Yes, that happened, okay? But actually, there were Sephardic Jews in Iberia before this date that I'm going to talk about here. They were already there. We kind of know how they got there, some of them. But in the 1880s, Ashkenazi Jews from Europe, as well as Sephardic Jews from Turkey, Bulgaria, and North Africa, again, another contingency from North Africa, immigrated to the land called Palestine. So we're getting close to the 1900s, and now we see what? We see again, these are people who continue. So you know about the 10 northern tribes. We know, and by the way, they're continuing to migrate all this time. But now we also see that the people known as Yehudahites didn't always stay in that land either. Are you see what I'm saying? They're also migrating. They're changing locations all the time as well. So now they have gone, now they're immigrating to Palestine. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, thousands of Jewish immigrants began arriving in the Holy Land and began to establish new Jewish settlements in that land. So you're talking about the 1800s and the early 1900s. And these immigrants were largely motivated by nationalism. They wanted a homeland. They wanted to be in their homeland. And a desire to live in the land of their ancestors. Because there had been generations of migration out of that land, and there was a desire to return to the land of their ancestors. That's their homeland. Zionism, which was that desire and that willingness to work toward a national homeland, is called Zionism. And there are also Christian Zionists who also have a desire to see Israel and Judah back in their land. It is their land. And the reason why it's their land is because God put them there and it belongs to Him. And God has a right to give land to whoever He chooses to give it to, because the earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof, and He can give it to whomever He decides to give it. And support for founding a new Jewish state emerged. And obviously, note 13. Any question on 12? Note 13 is close to my heart. During this period, same period, the revival of the Hebrew language began. If you have visited many locations in Israel, and I would say been in Jerusalem, you've been in Tel Aviv, you've been in Haifa, you have been in Eilat, there's something you're going to notice. And that is this: in every major Israeli city, there is a street called Ben Yehuda Street. And by the way, where we stayed in Tel Aviv, we were not far from Ben Yehuda Street in Tel Aviv. And of course, we all know about Ben Yehuda Street in Jerusalem, but there's a Ben Yehuda Street in every major city in Israel. And this is why. Hebrew had not been used other than certainly basically in just reading the scripture. And therefore, it was considered by many people to be a dead spoken language. Now, obviously written, but even though you had the Masoretic text, it was still considered a dead language. But there was a Hebrew school system was established. Why? Because the dream was to return to their own land, the land of their ancestors. And so they established a Hebrew school system, and new words were coined to make Hebrew more practical for modern use, because there were words, when Hebrew was first formed as a language, there were certain words that you didn't need, because you didn't have anything to say this is what this is. And I shared with you before, when certain things came on, you had to find a word for it. And some words they just appropriated from other languages. For example, you have no trouble at all knowing what a radio is in Hebrew. It's radio. And you don't have any problem with knowing what a television is. It's what? Television. But there are other words that they actually have taken from other languages and put into Hebrew. So this effort was spearheaded by a man named Eliezer Ben Yehuda. Now you know who the Ben Yehuda streets are named for. This is kind of interesting. If you study Eliezer Ben Yehuda, when he was doing this, when he was starting this, he would not allow his children to speak any other language than Hebrew as he's beginning to, because he knows that that's how you learn, right? And isn't that interesting? Ben Yehuda did that way back then, and now they think they have this brand new way of learning a language called immersion. Just immerse yourself in the language. You can't, and of course that is what? You can't speak it. We're all going to learn this, and we're all going to be doing this. He did it with his children way back in the day. And as a result of his efforts, Hebrew then became an everyday spoken language. And it gradually became the primary language of the Jewish population of the Holy Land. So when you go to Israel, Hebrew is the primary language. Now, today, before an individual can graduate from high school in Israel, they must be fluent in Hebrew, Arabic, and English. That's the requirement for a high school graduate. And the reason being is if you're going to get a job in Israel, you have to at least know those three languages to be able to assist people. Now, are there going to be places where you might find somebody working as a clerk or something and they're not going to be real fluent in English? Well, yeah, of course. How many have ever taken a foreign language in school? How many are fluent in it right now? For you at home, and I raised my hand too. I think I had about four hands, and none went up one being fluent. I will be honest with you. I took 2 years of French. Definitely not fluent. You know, very little can I say in French, and that's okay because I really don't. I've been in Paris, but I probably will never ever have to use it. I've had 2 years of German, and probably the only German that I can do is probably a little Yiddish, and it's more Yiddish than German. So you can imagine, even though they're, it's like study for the test, study for the graduation, and they may not be fluent in English. But really, in order to really get along in Israel, you would obviously have to speak Arabic and Hebrew because those are the main languages in Israel. Now, the growth of the Jewish population in what was known as Palestine was disrupted by the outbreak of World War I. World War I in 1914. And the reason why really it affected that area was because obviously Turkey was a part of the enemy. So during the war, many Jews were expelled from Palestine because they had immigrated from countries now at war with the Ottoman Empire, including eventually, we were a Johnny-come-lately, but eventually the United States, but certainly the European nations. So the Ottoman authorities expelled the entire, now think about this, you have lived here, by this time, probably your parents, your grandparents, and you, and the entire Jewish populations of Tel Aviv and Jaffa on the coast were expelled. Well, if you were suddenly expelled from where you're living, you have no visible means of support. And so many deportees subsequently died from hunger and disease.
You say disease?
Yes, hunger and disease, D-I-S-E-A-S-E.
Is this blank before it, we missed that.
What, which one?
The blank before that one expelled.
Jewish?
Jewish.
They expelled the entire Jewish populations of Tel Aviv and Jaffa. Now I'm skipping now to 1917 to 1948. So you had 1914, obviously the Ottoman Empire lost, along with Germany, lost World War I, which basically, because of the way it was handled, was really setting up World War II. But in 1917, near the end of World War I, following the defeat of the Ottoman Empire, Palestine was occupied by British forces. British, B-R-I-T-I-S-H forces. Now, some of you, hopefully, some dots are going to connect now. Isn't this interesting? And if you know when we did that, British, and you're saying, and how many of them might have been something they didn't know they were. How many, and now I'm bringing something that's not in your notes that I know of. You've heard of General Allenby. General Allenby, British General Allenby. Remember, he was the one that basically went in, liberated Jerusalem. And what, Christian, and what major concession did he make before he went into Jerusalem? He got off of his horse and walked into Jerusalem. And he made this statement. He said, "My Lord humbled himself to ride on a donkey coming in Jerusalem. I will not ride on a horse. I will walk into Jerusalem." General Allenby was very loved by the people of Israel. And, but now you're beginning to see how some of the strings are starting to attach. And we haven't even begun to attach all the strings at all. But the United Kingdom, and some of you probably have a hint of where most of a certain tribe went. The United Kingdom was granted control of the area west of the Jordan River. So anything west of the Jordan River was controlled by British forces. And we know that now that comprises, at that point, the state of Israel, the West Bank, and the Gaza Strip, and the East Bank, which later became the nation of Jordan. And I'll kind of hit this with you. And when we look at the tribe of Reuben, I will talk to you about the Balfour Declaration, because France, without the support of France, probably the Balfour Declaration probably wouldn't have actually come into fruition. But the Balfour Declaration had basically stated that because the British would not have won World War I were it not for a Jewish chemist who came up with synthetic gunpowder. They would have probably lost World War I. And when they asked him, well, what can we do? Because, I mean, seriously, had that not been the case, England would have been speaking German, without a doubt. And his response was, a homeland for my people. Because he was Jewish. And so out of that came what is called the Balfour Declaration of 1917. Now, the original plan for the Balfour Declaration was not only west of the Jordan River, but also east of the Jordan River. by the way, it lines up with what will one day be, plus the boundaries of the fulfillment of God's promise to his people. But what you had was, you had what is now called the West Bank, meaning the West Bank of the Jordan River, all that land, by the way, all that to the Mediterranean Sea, became what was the British Mandate of Palestine. And the East Bank of the Jordan River, the nation of Jordan. Well, here's what happened. Under the Balfour Declaration, it was supposed to be, they had to have somebody to come into that land and kind of be what was supposed to have been kind of a placeholder to develop it so that it would expand to be all of what we would know as the Jewish homeland in that area. So they went to Iraq and they got a family, the Hashemite family, to come and supposedly be placeholders and get this ready and kind of, because it's, you have to develop it. Well, how many know that once people get authority and power, they do not like to give it up easily? And that's what happened. So you had all of that, the Hashemites, and by the way, the present King Abdullah is a Hashemite. And by the way, if you've ever been to Jordan, when you get there, you are welcome to what? You are not welcome to a part of what was supposed to be the mandate for God's natural people's land. You are welcome to the Hashemite kingdom of Jordan. Because they just didn't want to give it up. And they didn't give it up. And they haven't given it up. So that's what they did. They said it was, and it was certainly. So this control was given to the British by the Versailles Peace Conference, which established the League of Nations. League of Nations, which was the forerunner to the do-nothing United Nothings. And so if you follow the United Nations, you know why I call them the United Nothings. And I just shared with you on Sunday, the people who were here on Sunday, that the United Nations has voted and has made it stipulated that every May 14th they will commemorate the disaster. And if you know that date, you know that that disaster they're talking about is the birth of the modern state of Israel. So all these nations, how many have ever read in the Bible that the whole world will turn against Israel? It's under right now, it's really heading in that direction. Now, during World War I, the British had made two promises regarding territory in the Middle East. Britain had promised the local Arabs through Lawrence of Arabia. Yeah, there really was a Lawrence of Arabia. It wasn't just a movie. Promised them independence for a united Arab country covering most of the Arab Middle East, in exchange for their support of the British, and we know they did. They fought under the leadership of Lawrence of Arabia. They also promised to create and foster a Jewish national homeland as laid out in the Balfour Declaration. Now, with the British conquest, Jews who had been expelled by the Ottomans were able to return because they made the promise, verbal promise, there'll be an Arab nation, there'll be a Jewish nation. And guess what? If you're going to say, okay, you're welcome back. So here comes Jewish people who had immigrated, right? Immigrated other places. Well, they began to immigrate to Israel. So Jewish immigration picked up again. Now remember I said there were only 5,000 at one time? Well, about 40,000 Jewish immigrants arrived in Palestine from 1919 to the start of an economic crisis in Palestine in 1923. So 40,000 Jewish people came back to the land in 4 years. And from 1924 to 1928, approximately 80,000 more Jewish immigrants arrived. So you got another 4 years with another 80,000. And in the years between 1929 and 1939, you had 250,000 Jewish immigrants coming into the land. Let me ask you a question. Why do you think there was such an influx between the years 1929 and 1939? If you can have any idea of history of what was going on. Anyone that began to watch what was happening in Europe and could read the handwriting on the wall said, this is the time to leave. Right now, presently, in the United States of America, there is an individual who they are saying is someone who can read what's happening. And the bottom line is, what is he saying? He is saying, Jewish people leave and come to Israel. And if you get on, you can Google it for yourself. You can listen to Rumble or any of the others that where you can get unfiltered truth. You'll hear his message, and it's because he said, "I can see what this is leading to," which I find a little interesting because one of the last things my mother said to me that at the time seemed kind of strange. Doesn't seem so strange now. But, so that's why you had that many coming. These were people, and then some who didn't think that, and they stayed. But during this period, land continued. Now they can purchase land. Remember, they couldn't buy it before. Now they can purchase land. And so land continued to be purchased by Jews, and many new Jewish settlements were established. And existing Jewish communities in urban areas continued to grow. Tel Aviv, in particular, on the coast, saw large-scale development and became a major city. And when I first saw Tel Aviv, the very first time, very first trip to Israel, and saw Tel Aviv, it almost takes your breath away because I don't know what you're expecting, but I'll be honest with you, I wasn't expecting to see what I saw. And I can tell you, and then going many, many decades later, just this year, it's like, wow, the change even the last time I was there in Tel Aviv. So major, so you can imagine, great development began. And so Tel Aviv was home to over 1/3 of the Jewish population by 1939. So a third of all the people who lived in the land lived in Tel Aviv. If you know anything about Tel Aviv, the saying for Jerusalem is Jerusalem prays and Tel Aviv plays. And they do everything, you know, there's seemingly no closing time in Tel Aviv. So during this time, tensions with the Arabs increased over Jewish immigration because you can imagine it's beginning to grow. More and more Jewish people are coming back to the land. And so you have that tension. And in the years between 1936 and 1939, Arabs launched widespread attacks against both Jews and the British, because the British were occupying, so they thought. Now, in 1947, and I'm really covering a vast amount of time, but in 1947, there were approximately 630,000 Jews living alongside 1.2 million Arabs in Palestine. And they're complaining and are tense. And they basically were outnumbering them even at that time 2-1. And they do the same thing today. Following increasing levels of violence, the British government expressed a desire to withdraw from Palestine that year. We want out. Because basically, they were killing the British and the Jewish people. And so the proposed plan, now remember originally the Balfour Declaration had given the Jewish people as a homeland all of what they had plus all of what made up Jordan. That was the original Balfour plan. Now you've got Jordan, they're over here. They took it, appropriated from the Balfour Declaration. Now they're over here, and now guess what they're going to do? That's why I say these people were playing fast and loose all the time with the welfare of the people in that land. And so now their proposed plan of partition would have split Palestine into 2 states. Well, they already had a state, east of the Jordan, but now they're going to take this one and they're going to make 2 states, an Arab state and a Jewish state, in that small swath of land. So the plan also gave a little over half of the land area of Jerusalem would be given to the Jewish state, and the Palestinian state would have gotten, or the Arab state would have gotten the rest. Now, immediately following the adoption of the partition plan by the United Nations General Assembly by a vote of 181 to 11, and its subsequent acceptance by the Jewish leadership. Listen, when you understand 1947, very few people survived the Holocaust. They have nowhere to go. And by the way, if you ever saw Schindler's List, the movie, at the end, when they're freed from the camps and they're looking around and where to go, they had nothing. Most of their family was gone. And guess what they were told? Well, if I were you, I wouldn't go east. They'll kill you there. Wouldn't go north either because they don't like you there. And the west doesn't want you, which was the truth. And so you saw them walking south. Walking where? Heading to what we know today is Israel. So when you understand that, of course they're going to do that. Of course they're going to say, we'll take it, whatever little bit of land you'll give us. If we can live in that land, we'll take it. And I'm going to really project because my mic went dead. I can do that. Maybe I'll be able to talk tomorrow, but I will project tonight for a few minutes, about 5 minutes. So they said, yes, we will accept it. But guess what? As soon as it was accepted, civil war broke out between the Arab community and the Jewish community as armies of the Arab League. Now, who made up the Arab League? It wasn't the Arabs living in that area. It was those Arabs who lived outside of what would become the state of Israel. And they sought to squelch the new Jewish state. And when they voted, the Jewish leadership voted, we'll accept that, we'll take whatever little land we can get, they invited Arabs living in that area, stay, help us build a prosperous nation and culture. So when you get when you're told, and it's a lie, it's an absolute lie. Oh, they just took land from Arabs and they took their home and confiscated them. No, they did not. Those Arabs were told, you leave, and when we win, you'll come back and you'll not only get your land back and your houses back, you can take theirs too, because we're going to drive them into the sea. Only the plans of mice and men don't always work out. And it didn't. On May the 14th, 1948, May 14th, 1948, one day before the end of the British Mandate, the leaders of the Jewish community in what was then known as Palestine, led by the future Prime Minister David Ben-Gurion, G-U-R-I-O-N, declared the establishment of a Jewish state known as the Free and Independent State of Israel, I-S-R-A-E-L. And we will stop there and pick up. Any questions? Any questions or comments? Any comments about the history? Yes, Janice?
I missed the one on 1/3 of the.
Oh, 1/3 of the Jewish population. It was a home to over 1/3 of the Jewish population. Which one? Was it the one before or the one after? Which number? What number? Are you talking about 17? On page 4, number 17. What number 17? Oh, following increasing levels of violence. I need to know the number of the note. Is it 17?
It's right above 17. 16.
Okay, 16. So it's on page 17. Okay. Okay, Jews who had been expelled, that's the first one, by the Ottomans, were able to return and Jewish immigration picked up again. And then the next flag, during this period, land continued to be purchased by Jews. Many new Jewish settlements were established, and existing Jewish communities in urban areas continued to grow. Okay, Tel Aviv in particular saw large-scale development and became a major city. It was home to over 1/3 of the Jewish population by 1939, and then during this time, tensions with the Arabs increased over Jewish immigration. IMMigration. They began to get really upset because now more and more Jewish people are immigrating into Israel. And that's why they launched the widespread attack. So why are we looking at this? We are looking at this because I want you to know that all the time the 10 northern tribes, they've been migrating for a long time. But what you're finding is, some people think that, well, the southern kingdom just stayed there. No, they didn't stay either. I mean, they were expelled numerous times, and they're going to go somewhere. They're not, they're just not going to disappear. So they're also moving all the time. And sometimes they will move and commingle with their brethren, and they don't know they're their brethren, and their brethren don't know they're their brethren. And you're going to be seeing this happen from this time into our present day. So we're glad that you have joined us. Don't forget that you have the opportunity to give us comments. If this is a blessing to you, please let me know. If you have questions, please feel free to call in your question or send in your question or drop your question off in the drop box in the lobby of the church if you want to give in response to the teaching you're receiving. And by the way, thank you to so many of you who are doing that. So many of you write in and you send in an offering and put on there Joash Chess or Wednesday night class. We appreciate very much you doing that. That enables us to get this out to you as well as preparing the written notes. And so thank you very much for your faithfulness to helping us get this out to as many people as want to hear this. We love you and Jesus loves you. And more importantly, I am so grateful for your love for God's word. Have a blessed rest of the week, and we'll be looking at all of you next week.